The moment I stepped into the woods, I felt it, the wrongness that clung to the air like a heavy fog. The trees seemed alive, their gnarled branches curling like fingers eager to snatch me. The town of Black Hollow, nestled in the valley below, had whispered of a cult in these woods, but whispers didn't prepare me for this. My name is Ryland Kane, and hunting is my trade. Not deer or game, but the things that hide in shadows and thrive on fear. I'd faced vampires in Paris, shapeshifters in the Amazon, and once a demon in a South African cave. But this was different. The people of Black Hollow didn't just fear the cult. They revered it in their silence, speaking in hushed tones about the hallowed. They spoke of strange lights in the sky, missing children, and a presence in the woods that didn't belong to this world. I gripped my rifle tighter, the steel cold against my gloved hands. The contract had been simple. Locate the cult, disrupt their activities, and bring back proof. Simple never lasted long in my line of work. The first sign came within an hour, a clearing where the grass grew in spiraling patterns, as though some invisible force had twisted it. At the center was a stone altar, slick with what I hoped wasn't blood. Surrounding it were carved symbols, pulsing faintly with an otherworldly green glow. My stomach churned. I'd seen plenty of occult symbols, but these were alive, moving like living things. I crouched, inspecting the altar. That's when I heard the sound, whispers, too faint to understand but enough to raise every hair on my body. I spun around, rifle aimed, but there was nothing. The woods were silent again, save for the distant rustle of leaves. But the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. And then I saw them. Figures, cloaked in tattered robes, emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by masks fashioned to resemble alien visages, elongated, with too many eyes and mouths that were jagged slashes. They moved in unison, their steps too synchronized to be natural. There were 5 of them, maybe 6. My finger hovered over the trigger, but I waited. Shooting one might send the others into a frenzy, and I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I watched as they encircled the altar, their voices rising in a guttural chant. The symbols on the stone grew brighter, and the air thickened with a metallic tang. One of them stepped forward, holding a knife carved from a bone too large to be human. He raised it high, and I knew whatever was about to happen couldn't be allowed. I stepped from the shadows, rifle raised. Drop the knife. My voice cut through the chanting, silencing it instantly. For a moment they stood frozen, their masked faces turning toward me in unison. The one with the knife tilted his head, as if studying me. Then, without a word, he lunged. The rifle's crack shattered the silence. The bullet struck him square in the chest, sending him sprawling. The others didn't even flinch. Instead, they advanced, their movements unervingly fluid. I fired again, dropping another, but the remaining 4 closed the distance too fast. I swung the butt of my rifle into the nearest one, feeling the satisfying crunch of bone beneath the impact, but the others were on me. A blow to my stomach knocked the wind out of me, and I hit the ground hard, my rifle skidding out of reach. Hands clawed at me, their grips inhumanly strong. Panic surged as I fought back, pulling the knife from my boot and slashing wildly. I caught one across the throat, black ichor spraying like oil. It hissed as it fell, convulsing, but the others didn't relent. Then, the ground beneath us shook. A low, guttural rumble filled the air, vibrating in my chest. The cultists froze, their masked faces snapping toward the altar. The symbols on the stone burned brighter, and a crack split the air, as though reality itself had been torn open. A shape began to emerge, a mass of writhing tentacles, each lined with rows of teeth, dripping with a viscous, black fluid that hissed as it touched the ground. The cultists dropped to their knees, their hands raised in worship. I scrambled back, heart hammering. I'd read about cosmic horrors, entities that defied logic and sanity. But reading didn't prepare you for seeing one. It turned, or maybe one of its countless eyes focused on me. The weight of its gaze was unbearable, like my very soul was being stripped away. My mind screamed to run, but my legs refused to obey. And then, a voice, deep, resonant, and ancient, spoke directly into my mind. "You are not worthy." The pressure lifted, and I gasped for air. The creature's attention shifted to the cultists, who trembled with a mix of ecstasy and fear. The voice spoke again, but this time, it was different. Angry. "You have failed me." Before my eyes, the creature lashed out, its tentacles wrapping around the kneeling figures. They screamed, a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life, as they were pulled into the mass, consumed one by one. The thing writhed, as if growing stronger with each sacrifice. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. Adrenaline surged, and I bolted, grabbing my rifle as I ran. The forest blurred around me, the creature's growls and whispers chasing me like a living nightmare. I didn't stop until I was out of the woods, collapsing on the dirt road leading back to Black Hollow. The town was dark, the streets deserted. I stumbled toward the inn where I'd been staying, my mind racing. I'd seen plenty of horrors, but this was different. This was a god, or something close to it. And it wasn't done with me yet. As I reached the inn, a single thought burned in my mind. I hadn't hunted the cult. It had hunted me. I didn't sleep that night. The darkness in my room felt alive, and every creak of the old inn sent my heart racing. My hands still shook as I cleaned and reloaded my rifle, the familiar ritual barely soothing my nerve. The creature's voice echoed in my mind, ancient, vast, and impossibly cruel. It had spoken to me, spared me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't mercy. It was a test. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I couldn't walk away. The contract had warned me of dangers but never hinted at this. Yet, if I left now, this thing would grow stronger, feeding off more innocent lives. My pride, my survival instincts, and my conscience fought a brutal war, but in the end, I packed my gear and headed back into the woods. The town was no help. Black Hollow was practically abandoned, its people barricading themselves indoors as though they knew what stalked the forest. The few who dared to glance at me from behind curtains looked away the moment our eyes met. Cowards, or maybe they were smart. Either way, I was alone. Back in the woods, the air was heavier, the wrongness more pronounced. It felt like the forest itself was against me. Paths twisted in impossible ways, leading me in circles until I forced myself to rely on instinct rather than logic. The deeper I went, the less natural the terrain became. Trees leaned at unnatural angles, their bark cracked and oozing a dark sap that smelled of decay. Stones jutted from the ground, etched with the same glowing symbols as the altar. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, it was impossible to tell. Then I found it. The clearing was larger this time, with a towering stone monolith at its center. Unlike the altar, this wasn't crudely made. It was ancient, its surface smooth and cold despite the humid air. Symbols danced across its surface, shifting as I approached, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Surrounding the monolith were makeshift shelters, constructed from bones, animal hides, and twisted branches. The stench of rot was overpowering. I scanned the area, my rifle raised, but there was no sign of the cultists. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the faint hum emanating from the monolith. I moved cautiously, my boots crunching on the brittle ground. That's when I noticed the cage. It was crude but sturdy, built from iron bars lashed together with leather strip. Inside was a young woman, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Her wrists and ankles were shackled, her eyes hollow. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment, hope flickered in her gaze. "Who are you?" she croaked, her voice barely audible. "Someone who doesn't plan on leaving you here," I said, scanning the area again. "How many of them are there?" "Too many," she whispered. "And they'll be back soon. You need to go." "Not without you." I knelt, examining the lock on the cage. It was rusted but solid, and I didn't have the tools to break it silently. "Why did they take you?" Her eyes darted to the monolith, and she shuddered. "Sacrifice. They believe it'll summon their god fully into this world. Please, just go before." The sound of footsteps cut her off. I spun, raising my rifle, as the cultists emerged from the shadows. There were at least a dozen, their masks and robes more ornate than the ones I'd faced before. At their head was a figure draped in crimson, their mask a grotesque amalgamation of twisted faces. In their hands they carried a staff topped with a black, pulsating crystal. An interloper, the leader hissed, their voice layered with a deep, unnatural resonance. "You desecrate holy ground. You mean this hellhole?" I aimed at the leader's chest. "Let her go, and maybe I won't put a hole in your head." They tilted their mask as if amused. "You are but a fly, swatting at the infinite. This vessel," they gestured to the woman, "is the key. And you are nothing." The cultists surged forward. I fired, dropping the first two in their tracks, but the others moved with unnerving speed. I backed toward the cage, firing again and again, each shot taking down another robed figure. The leader raised their staff, and a wave of force slammed into me, knocking me off my feet. My rifle skittered away, and pain lanced through my ribs. The cultists closed in. I pulled my knife, slashing at the nearest one, but there were too many. They pinned me, their hands like iron, as the leader approached. "You cannot stop what has already begun," they said, their staff glowing brighter. "Your resistance is futile." Before they could strike, a deafening roar split the air. The ground trembled, and the monolith began to glow. The cultists froze, their heads snapping toward it in unison. The woman in the cage screamed as the symbols on the stone burned brighter, and a tear formed in the air above it, a jagged wound in reality. From it emerged the same creature I'd seen before, its tentacles writhing, its many eyes glaring down at us. The cultists dropped to their knees, chanting in ecstasy. The leader raised their arms, as if offering themselves to the thing. But the creature didn't seem pleased. Its voice filled my mind again, louder this time, and filled with rage. "You dare summon me unprepared?" The leader faltered. "Great One, we—" The creature lashed out, its tentacle piercing the leader's chest. They convulsed, their body dissolving into a puddle of black sludge. The other cultists screamed, but their worship turned to terror as the creature attacked, consuming them one by one. In the chaos, I broke free, grabbing my rifle and rushing to the cage. The woman stared at me, her eyes wide. "You have to stop it." "Working on it," I growled, shooting the lock until it shattered. I pulled her out, and we ran, the ground shaking beneath us as the creature's rampage continued. We didn't stop until we were deep in the woods, the monolith a distant glow behind us. The woman collapsed, gasping for air. I leaned against a tree, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. "What the hell was that?" I asked. She looked at me, her expression grim. "A god. Or something worse." We didn't speak for a long time. The forest had gone eerily quiet, the chaos from the clearing fading into an oppressive stillness. My breath still came in ragged gasps, and the woman, who I'd learned was named Elise, stared blankly into the distance, as though trying to piece together her sanity. When I finally broke the silence, my voice was hoarse. "What do you mean, something worse? That thing wasn't bad enough?" Elise hugged her knees, her shackles jangling softly. "The cult doesn't worship a god in the sense we understand. It's a being older than anything in this universe, older than the universe itself. It's not benevolent, not malevolent. It simply is. And we're nothing more than insects in its path." I grimaced. "Great. And now it's loose." She shook her head. "No. Not yet. What you saw was an aspect of it. A fragment. The cult's goal is to bring it here fully, to tether it to this reality. That's why they needed me. She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "A vessel." My stomach turned. "A vessel for that thing?" She nodded, her face pale. "The ritual uses bloodlines. I'm a descendant of one of their founders. My family's been running from them for generations. They finally caught me." I leaned back, trying to absorb this new nightmare. "Why didn't it just take you back there? Why wipe out its followers instead?" Elise shuddered. "The cult messed up. Summoning even a fragment of it takes precise rituals, offerings, and, most importantly, prepared vessels. They rushed. The creature views imperfection as an insult. That's why it slaughtered them. Comforting? I checked my rifle, reloading it with shaky hands. So what happens now? Does it just go away? She hesitated again, and I hated the answer before she even said it. No. It'll linger, feeding off the traces of its summoning, growing stronger. Eventually, it'll try again. And the cult isn't gone, they're everywhere like cockroaches. Some of them will come looking for us. My jaw clenched. We can't let it get that far. How do you plan to stop something like that? Elise asked, her voice tinged with despair. It's not a monster you can kill. It's beyond us. I didn't have a good answer, but I refused to give up. If it's tethered to the ritual site, that's where we start. If we destroy whatever's keeping it anchored, maybe we can send it back. Elise's eyes widened. That's insane. You'd be walking into its territory. It knows you now, it'll be waiting. I stood, gripping my rifle. Then we don't wait. Every second we sit here, it gets stronger. She hesitated, then rose to her feet. You're going to get us both killed. Maybe, I admitted. But I'm not letting it take this world without a fight. The journey back to the clearing felt like a death march. The air grew colder, the forest darker, as though the sun had abandoned this place entirely. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Elise followed close behind, her breath shallow, her eyes darting nervously. When we reached the clearing, the monolith was still there, its glow pulsating like a heartbeat. The ground was slick with black ichor, the remains of the cultists scattered like broken dolls. The creature's fragment loomed above the stone, its writhing mass shifting in unnatural ways. Its eyes, dozens of them, turned toward us the moment we stepped into the open. The voice thundered in my mind, a cacophony of rage and contempt. You return. Foolish. I ignored the searing pain in my skull and raised my rifle. We're here to finish this. It didn't laugh, but the sensation of mockery was overwhelming. You think you can harm me? You cannot comprehend what I am. Elise clutched my arm. Rylan, it's too strong. We can't fight it. I glanced at her, then back at the monolith. We don't have to fight it. We just need to sever its tether. I moved toward the monolith, each step heavier than the last. The air thickened, pressing against me like an invisible wall. The creature's tentacles lashed out, smashing into the ground inches from me, but I didn't stop. I fired at the monolith, the bullets sparking off its surface but leaving no mark. Rylan! Elise screamed. It's indestructible! The creature's laughter reverberated in my mind. You are nothing. You cannot destroy my anchor. Desperation clawed at me. There had to be a way, some weakness, some way to sever its connection. My eyes darted across the monolith, searching for anything that might help. That's when I saw it, the black crystal atop the staff of the dead cult leader. It lay among the carnage, pulsing faintly, its glow mirroring the monolith. Elise! I shouted. The crystal! Get it? She hesitated, then ran, weaving through the debris as the creature's tentacles lashed out. I covered her, firing at the monstrous appendages, each shot buying her a second more. She reached the staff, grabbed the crystal, and held it up. The creature roared, its rage palpable. No. Do not touch it. Smash it, I yelled. Elise hesitated, the crystal pulsating in her hands, almost hypnotic. For a moment I thought she wouldn't do it, that the thing was already influencing her. But then, with a scream, she hurled it against the monolith. The impact was catastrophic. The crystal shattered, and the monolith erupted in a blinding light. The creature howled, its form writhing violently as the ground trembled. The light expanded, consuming the clearing, and for a moment I thought we'd succeeded. But then the light dimmed, and the creature remained, its form diminished but still very much alive. You think this is over? It hissed, its voice weaker but no less menacing. You cannot banish me. I will return. I am eternal. The forest shook as the creature began to retreat, its mass dissolving into the shadows. The monolith crumbled, its power broken, but the lingering presence of the being hung heavy in the air. I lowered my rifle, my body trembling. Elise stood beside me, her face pale but determined. Did we stop it? For now, I said, my voice hollow. But it'll come back. And next time, it'll be stronger. The silence in the aftermath was deafening, broken only by the faint crackle of the crumbling monolith. Elise and I stood in the ruins of the clearing, our breaths fogging in the unnaturally cold air. The creature's fragment was gone, but its presence lingered, like the echo of a scream that refused to fade. It's not over, Elise whispered, her voice trembling. I tightened my grip on the rifle, scanning the dark woods. No. But we bought time. That's something. Time for what? She asked, looking at me with hollow eyes. That thing will come back, and the cult will be ready. Stronger. We can't fight this forever. She was right, and that terrified me. But fear was a luxury I couldn't afford. We don't fight it forever, I said. We find a way to stop it for good. Elise laughed bitterly. Stop it for good? It's not a monster, Rylan. It's not even a god, it's an idea, a force. You can't kill an idea. Maybe not, I admitted. But everything has a weakness. Even that thing. We didn't return to Black Hollow. The town was already a lost cause, its people too entrenched in their silent worship of the cult's power. Instead, we headed east, following the sparse information Elise had on the cult's operations. She'd grown up running from them, after all. Her parents had been hunters like me, though their fight had ended in blood and fire. The first week was hell. Elise was still recovering from her captivity, and I was haunted by the creature's voice. Sleep was a luxury neither of us could afford, the dark hours plagued by nightmares of twisting tentacles and countless eyes watching from the void. But we didn't stop. We couldn't. Our first real lead came from a burned-out church in a desolate town called Bramblewood. Inside, hidden beneath the scorched floorboards, was a journal belonging to a long-dead priest who had once fought the cult. The entries were erratic, riddled with paranoia, but one phrase stood out. The key lies in the veil. The creature's anchor is not here but beyond. Elise and I pored over the journal by the flickering light of a campfire, the words twisting in my mind like a riddle. What's the veil? I asked, glancing at Elise. She shook her head. I don't know. But if it's beyond this reality, then maybe. Her voice trailed off, and her expression darkened. What? She hesitated. There's a legend about the cult, about their beginning. They weren't just fanatics. They were explorers, seeking knowledge in places no one should go. The veil might be what separates our world from whatever they found. Great, I muttered. So we just have to cross into some nightmare dimension and destroy the creature's real anchor. No big deal. Elise shot me a weary look. You're the one who said everything has a weakness. Yeah, I didn't think the weakness would be in another reality. Finding a way to cross the veil was harder than I could have imagined. The cult's symbols, scattered across every site we visited, hinted at rituals and forbidden knowledge, but the pieces didn't fit together. Months passed as we hunted down fragments of the truth, moving from abandoned temples to underground lairs, each place more horrific than the last. And the cult was always one step ahead. They were rebuilding, recruiting, spreading like a plague. Every encounter left us battered and scarred, but we survived. Barely. It wasn't until we stumbled upon an ancient manuscript in the catacombs beneath an old cathedral that we finally found our answer. The ritual to cross the veil was there, scrawled in maddening detail. It required blood, sacrifice, and the will to confront the unknowable. Elise paled as she read it, her hands trembling. This isn't just a crossing, she said. It's a death sentence. It doesn't say what happens if we fail, but... We're not going to fail, I said, though the weight of her words pressed down on me. We've come too far to back out now. Elise looked at me, her eyes filled with doubt. You don't understand. If we do this, there's no coming back. Even if we win. I know, I said, my voice steady. But if we don't, no one else will. The ritual began at midnight, deep in the ruins of a forgotten temple. The air was thick with the stench of death, the symbols we'd drawn glowing faintly in the dark. Elise stood opposite me, a dagger in her hands, her expression unreadable. The chanting started as a whisper, growing louder with each repetition. The symbols burned brighter, the air around us crackling with energy. My vision blurred, and the ground seemed to tilt, as though reality itself was buckling under the strain. Then, the veil tore open. It wasn't a portal or a door, it was a wound, a jagged rip in the fabric of existence. Beyond it was darkness, but not the absence of light. It was a living, breathing void, filled with writhing shapes that defied logic. And there, at the center of it all, was the creature. Its true form was incomprehensible, a mass of shifting geometry and endless eyes that radiated malice. The fragment we'd faced before was nothing compared to this. It spoke, its voice shaking the temple to its foundation. "You dare enter my domain? You are dust. You are nothing." My hands shook, but I raised the dagger, my voice firm. "We didn't come here to talk." The creature roared, its mass surging toward us. The symbols around the temple flared to life, holding it back for now, but the barrier wouldn't last. Elise began the final incantation, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. The ritual required one final act, destruction of the creature's true anchor, hidden deep within the void. But to reach it, someone had to go beyond the barrier. "I'll do it," Elise said, stepping forward. "No," I snapped. "You've already lost too much." This was my fight from the start. Her eyes met mine, filled with a sadness I couldn't bear. "Rylan, you're the fighter. If anyone can hold it off, it's you. Let me finish this." Before I could stop her, she stepped into the void. The creature howled, its form convulsing as Elise disappeared into the darkness. The barrier shattered, and I was left alone to face the nightmare. I fired my rifle, slashed with my knife, did everything I could to hold it back, but it was endless, relentless. Then, the void pulsed. The creature let out a deafening scream as the darkness around it began to collapse. Elise's voice rang out, defiant and strong, echoing through the void. "It's done." The wound in reality began to seal, the creature's form unraveling as the void consumed it. I barely made it back, diving through the closing tear as the temple collapsed around me. When the dust settled, Elise was gone. I returned to the surface alone, battered but alive. The creature was gone, its presence erased from the world. The cult would try again, they always would, but they'd have to start from nothing. And me? I was left with scars that would never heal and a debt I could never repay. Elise had been right, we couldn't kill an idea. But we could fight it, and as long as I had breath in my lungs, I would. For her. For everyone.